The headline rolled across the ticker in glowing red letters, and for a moment the entire world seemed to pause. U.S. Treasury announces dinar exchange date, time and live rate details. It was the kind of announcement that people dreamed of, whispered about, even doubted would ever come. Yet here it was plastered on every news channel and buzzing on every smartphone screen. Living rooms, cafes, offices, and even quiet bedrooms lit up with gasps, cheers, and stunned silence. For years, the Iraqi dinar revaluation had lived in the realm of speculation, a shadowy corner of financial forums and whispered conversations among believers, but now it was official. This wasn't a rumor carried by faceless YouTubers or half-hidden documents circulating in Telegram groups. This was the U.S. Treasury speaking, the ultimate stamp of legitimacy. Across the suburbs, in modest houses where families had quietly stacked away small bundles of dinar for maybe someday, people stared at their television sets as though they were seeing gold pour out of the screen. Fathers reached for safes hidden in closets, pulling out envelopes marked with neat handwriting, 10 zeros, 00 ict, 25 000 ict. Mothers glanced at their children and whispered that maybe college tuition would finally be covered, that maybe mortgages would no longer be chains. In the cities, groups of friends gathered in front of glowing monitors, phones pinging with constant messages. Did you see it? Is this real? Check CNBC, they're confirming it. The moment had a surreal weight. Those who had been mocked by friends and family for holding worthless paper now felt vindication rising in their chests. Memories of being laughed at for buying foreign currency suddenly replayed, but this time with satisfaction. They remembered the countless nights scrolling forums, the prayers, the debates, the promises they whispered to themselves that one day their patience would be rewarded. And now the reward had a date, a time, and a live rate number confirmed by the highest financial authority in the United States. In small towns, local diners became hubs of conversation. Farmers leaned over their coffee cups, their hands trembling slightly as they discussed the announcement with neighbors. "I told you," one man said with tears in his eyes, "I told you this day would come." Elderly couples who had held onto dinar as a strange form of retirement savings squeezed each other's hands tightly, their eyes glistening with the thought that their twilight years might now be lived in comfort rather than worry. Bank employees, meanwhile, found themselves swept into a whirlwind of whispers and tension. Internal memos leaked faster than they could be controlled, hinting at new procedures, special desks, and exchange protocols that most tellers had never heard of before. Rumors spread among staff that executives had been in late-night meetings all week, preparing for this exact announcement. Some employees shared knowing glances, their hearts pounding as they wondered whether they were watching the birth of a new financial reality or the spark of chaos that could overwhelm the system. In homes where dinar sat quietly tucked away in desk drawers, the mood shifted from disbelief to frantic preparation. People opened safes, counted and recounted their notes, examined holograms and watermarks with nervous eyes, afraid that somehow they had been duped, afraid that their paper might not be the right series or issue. Families debated whether to head straight to the bank or wait for the lines to die down, though no one wanted to be last. Parents explained to their kids in hushed tones what was happening, that the little stacks of colorful bills, once a curiosity, were now keys to a different life. Social media exploded with live streams and emotional outbursts. People wept on camera, clutching their bundles of dinar. Others warned against getting too excited, reminding followers of the many times hopes had been raised only to crash. Yet the words U.S. Treasury confirms rang like a bell that silenced every doubter. Influencers streamed reaction videos with wide eyes and trembling voices, racking up millions of views in minutes. The hashtags #DinarRV, #US Treasury, and #exchange date trended across platforms. In high-rise apartments, wealthy investors poured expensive wine and clinked glasses, their voices laced with triumph. They had been in on this for years, buying not only dinar but also Vietnamese dong, Zim notes, and more. For them, the announcement meant not only wealth, but proof of their foresight. Yet even they felt a strange humility, a recognition that this was not just about profits, it was about history shifting before their eyes. Meanwhile, in modest apartments, single mothers stared at the news broadcast and allowed themselves to dream for the first time in years. A woman holding her child whispered that their future had just changed forever. A man drowning in debt clutched his dinar like a lifeline, already imagining the relief of watching balances vanish from his credit report. The energy in the air was unlike anything the financial world had ever seen. It was more than stocks, more than crypto surges, more than gold rushes. It was the culmination of hope forged through years of waiting. It wasn't just about money. It was about faith being rewarded, about the underdog finally winning. As the first wave of reports poured in, people noticed one striking thing: the rate wasn't hidden, wasn't theoretical. It was there, printed in black and white, flashing across the screen like a beacon. For a heartbeat, time itself seemed to stretch. Across living rooms, cafes, offices, and sidewalks, people stood still and stared at the number. A murmur rose, growing into shouts, into tears, into laughter. This was no longer the stuff of rumor. This was reality, undeniable and unstoppable. The world had shifted with the strike of a digital key at the Treasury, and every person holding even a single note of Iraqi dinar felt the ground move beneath their feet. What had once been dismissed as fantasy had become fact, and in that instant, millions of lives were forever changed. By sunrise the following day, the ripple from the announcement had turned into a tidal wave. Across the country, financial districts were buzzing with a strange mix of order and chaos. Outside certain banks, long lines had already formed before dawn. People came bundled in coats, some clutching thermoses of coffee, others holding folders packed with carefully organized stacks of Iraqi dinar. There were folding chairs lined along sidewalks, blankets wrapped around shoulders, and conversations whispered in low voices, as though everyone was standing on sacred ground. They weren't just waiting for a transaction, they were waiting for destiny to open its doors. The banks themselves had transformed overnight. Security guards in black uniforms patrolled the entrances with heightened awareness, their radios crackling every few minutes with updates. Inside, signs had been hastily posted: currency exchange by appointment only. Some banks handed out tickets with numbers printed on them, trying to impose a sense of order upon the nervous masses pressing against the glass doors. Branch managers, who just a week earlier were worried about routine tasks like mortgage approvals, now moved with sharp precision as if they were orchestrating a military operation. News crews gathered on sidewalks, microphones extended toward anyone willing to talk. Families who had driven through the night to reach major exchange centers told stories about their years of waiting, about the sacrifices they had made while holding onto their currency. A middle-aged father in a worn baseball cap wiped tears from his eyes as he described how he bought dinar after returning from military service in Iraq, always believing one day it would matter. His teenage daughter clutched his arm tightly, smiling through nervous tears at the thought that her college tuition would now be covered. Inside the banks, Treasury officials had quietly embedded themselves among staff. They carried laptops, binders filled with exchange protocols, and spoke in low tones, explaining step-by-step procedures to local employees who had never seen anything like this before. Documents were scanned with meticulous care, each note checked under specialized lights to confirm authenticity. Special scanners hummed as they counted bills with precision, each whir of the machine echoing like a heartbeat in the tense rooms. For those lucky enough to get inside early, the moment was overwhelming. Some sat silently in chairs, their hands shaking as they waited to be called forward. Others whispered nervously to their spouses, wondering if they had filled out the paperwork correctly, if they would be asked questions they couldn't answer. Rumors spread through the lines. One person claimed to know someone who had just walked out with millions credited instantly to their account. Another insisted that certain series of dinar were being rejected. Each story added to the frenzy. Each glance at the television screens mounted on the walls made the wait feel more like standing on the edge of history. Social media amplified everything. Live streams from outside banks showed crowds chanting prayers, clapping, or breaking into nervous laughter. Influencers held up their currency on camera, promising their followers that the process was real, that the rate flashing across the screens wasn't a dream. TikTok videos showed people dancing in the streets outside exchange centers, while others posted tearful reflections about finally paying off mortgages, medical bills, and student loans. Hashtags like #ExchangeDay and #RV now dominated the global conversation, crossing from financial forums into mainstream trending lists. Yet, beneath the excitement, a deep uncertainty lingered. Families argued in hushed voices about whether to exchange everything at once or hold some back in hopes the rate would rise even higher. Some were terrified that if they waited too long, the window might close, leaving them with nothing. A man pacing near the back of the line muttered to himself about insider tiers, about how Tier 4B was finally moving, his voice trembling with both excitement and paranoia. The entire atmosphere pulsed with adrenaline, as though everyone was running toward a finish line without knowing exactly where it ended. Bank staff, too, felt the weight of it all. Tellers who were used to handling routine transactions now found themselves dealing with sums so large that their hands shook while typing numbers into terminals. Managers instructed employees to remain calm, to treat each customer with patience, but the truth was that many inside were just as overwhelmed as those outside. Everyone knew they were part of something historic and that the smallest mistake could trigger panic. The live rate itself had become the heartbeat of the day. Displayed on digital boards behind glass counters, the number glowed with power. People stared at it with wide eyes, whispering prayers of gratitude or gasps of disbelief. For years, debates had raged over what the rate might be, speculation that filled endless threads online. But now, seeing it confirmed by the U.S. Treasury and reflected on the bank's systems, the number carried the weight of prophecy fulfilled. News anchors tried to maintain professionalism as they broadcast updates, but even their voices carried undertones of astonishment. One correspondent outside a major bank admitted on live television that he had never seen such scenes in his entire career. Another reporter described the atmosphere as a combination of Wall Street trading floor intensity and the emotional release of a national holiday. Meanwhile, the flow of humanity through the banks continued. One by one, individuals walked out of the glass doors, their faces transformed. Some emerged pale, clutching receipts with trembling hands, their eyes wide as though they couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Others burst into tears on the sidewalk, embraced by waiting family members who screamed with joy. In those moments, strangers hugged each other like lifelong friends, united by the shared experience of a dream finally taking shape. There were skeptics, of course, standing on the sidelines shaking their heads, insisting it was all an illusion, a bubble that would burst. Yet even they couldn't ignore the undeniable reality that thousands of people were walking out of banks visibly changed, their lives rewritten in real time. By midday, helicopters circled overhead in some cities, capturing aerial footage of the massive crowds outside exchange centers. The images broadcast worldwide painted a picture of a financial event unlike anything seen in modern history. Commentators compared it to the gold rushes of centuries past, but even those seemed smaller, more chaotic. This was organized, regulated, sanctioned by the highest financial authority in the land. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the lines that still stretched around blocks, a quiet sense of awe began to settle over everyone. The initial frenzy was giving way to a profound realization. This wasn't just about money. This was about history being written in real time. The Dinar RV wasn't just a financial adjustment, it was a collective moment of transformation, a turning point etched into the lives of ordinary people who had dared to believe against all odds. When the official exchange time finally struck, it felt as though the world inhaled and held its breath. In cities across the nation, banks opened their doors not to routine customers but to a flood of history in the making. Inside, the atmosphere was electric, a strange fusion of order and raw emotion. Clerks sat behind glass with stacks of forms, their computers linked to live Treasury feeds. Managers moved briskly from desk to desk, checking documents, answering questions, offering nervous smiles that betrayed the weight of what was unfolding. Each step of the process was rehearsed, every detail fine-tuned, but nothing could truly prepare them for the tidal wave of humanity surging forward. The first names were called, and people rose from chairs with trembling hands. One by one, they were escorted to exchange desks where their envelopes, briefcases, or boxes of carefully preserved dinar were spread out on counters under bright lights. Machines hummed to life, pulling stacks of colorful notes into their mechanical jaws, counting, verifying, checking for authenticity with a precision that felt almost ceremonial. Each click of the machine echoed like a drumbeat in the ears of the holders who had waited for years, even decades, for this very moment. For those going through the process, the emotions were overwhelming. A grandmother sat with her son at her side, her eyes misty as the teller explained the rate and asked if she wanted the funds deposited directly. She whispered something about finally being able to leave her grandchildren an inheritance, her voice breaking as her son placed a hand over hers. Nearby, a young couple gripped each other's hands tightly while watching their modest pile of notes transform into numbers far beyond what they had dared to dream. Relief washed over their faces, and they began to cry silently, realizing the crushing debt that had haunted them for years could now vanish in a single keystroke. Not everyone could contain themselves. Some laughed aloud, clapping their hands together in disbelief, drawing nervous glances from others still waiting. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at the receipts in their hands as though they were holding lightning on paper. One man, walking out of the glass doors with a folder pressed to his chest, stopped mid-stride, dropped to his knees on the sidewalk and raised his arms skyward, shouting words of gratitude that brought others to tears. Outside, cameras flashed and microphones pressed forward as people emerged from the banks. The world was watching, and each emotional reaction was broadcast instantly. Crowds cheered for those stepping out, strangers hugging strangers, tears mixing with laughter as the magnitude of what was happening rippled through every city. For years, people had spoken of the RV in whispers, dismissed as dreamers or conspiracy theorists. Now, the proof was printed on receipts and reflected in bank balances. Vindication and hope radiated from every face. The streets carried the energy of a celebration, but it wasn't wild chaos. It was a collective release, like steam venting from a pressure cooker that had been sealed too long. Some people walked quietly to their cars, gripping envelopes, their minds already racing with plans. Others lingered in groups, sharing stories of how long they had waited, recounting the ridicule they had endured, marveling at the fact that the impossible had finally arrived. There was laughter, yes, but also quiet sobbing as men and women realized they could now pay for surgeries, retire early, buy homes, or simply breathe without the crushing weight of financial anxiety. Inside the banks, the work continued with military precision. Clerks kept their voices steady, even as they processed transactions larger than anything they had ever handled in their careers. Supervisors reminded staff to stay calm, to follow protocol exactly, to double-check every signature and every scan. The knowledge that billions were moving in real time hung heavy in the air, yet there was also an unspoken sense of pride. They were part of something monumental, a shift that would be studied, debated, and remembered for generations. In homes across the nation, those not yet exchanged sat glued to screens, watching updates with equal parts anticipation and envy. Live streams showed the first wave of people walking out of banks with beaming faces, holding their receipts high like trophies. Families gathered around televisions, parents explaining to children that soon it would be their turn, that patience would be rewarded. Social media feeds flooded with testimonies, screenshots of balances, inspirational messages about faith and perseverance. The hashtags grew louder, crossing borders and languages until the RV wasn't just an American or Iraqi phenomenon. It was a global spectacle. Not everyone experienced pure joy. For some, the enormity of the moment was paralyzing. A man sat in his car for over an hour after exchanging, gripping the steering wheel tightly, unable to process that his entire financial reality had changed in minutes. A young woman confessed on a live stream that she was terrified of making the wrong decisions, afraid of losing what she had just gained. The RV wasn't just creating wealth, it was forcing people to face new choices, new responsibilities, and the frightening freedom of possibility. And yet, even in the fear, there was beauty. In community centers and church halls, people gathered to pray together, to give thanks, to hold each other as they processed the miracle of it all. In coffee shops, conversations buzzed about what to do next. Should they invest? Should they pay off everything immediately? Should they wait for a second wave? Taxi drivers swapped stories about passengers clutching dinar. Teachers whispered about finally being able to retire early. Everywhere, the talk was the same. The RV had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. As the day stretched into evening, the initial frenzy softened into something deeper, something more profound. The chaos of lines and security gave way to a quiet recognition. The world had changed. People walked home under city lights, clutching proof of their exchanges, their footsteps lighter than they had ever been. A new chapter had opened not only for them individually, but for entire communities, entire nations. For years, the Dinar RV had been a story of faith, of waiting, of enduring ridicule and disappointment. Now it was a story of vindication, of hope realized, of transformation. Final wave of exchanges ended not with fireworks or fanfare, but with a stillness that felt sacred, a collective sigh as people looked toward a future they had once only imagined. The Iraqi dinar revaluation was no longer a rumor, no longer a dream. It was reality, undeniable and irreversible. And for the millions who had held on through doubt, through ridicule, through endless waiting, it was proof that sometimes, against all odds, patience truly does pay off.